Mayo Football Podcast. I'm Rob Murphy. Welcome along for another chat about a managerial vacancy, about communication issues around letting managers go. Where are we? Where are we going? Mike Finnershy, how are you?
I'm good, Rob. I'm good. Just reading there that there's another candidate in the mix. I make that the fourth or fifth kite that's been flown by one particular local outlet in the last 7 days.
Okay.
6 days even, if I get the count right. Yeah, from last week to this week, it looks like everyone and anyone is interested in being the next Mayo senior manager. And if only it was that simple. If only it was that simple that we could have it all solved in every way inside a few days.
I have two men who are going to categorically rule themselves out of the race. Nigel Reape, how are you?
Gentlemen.
Oh, he hasn't ruled himself out. That's what you heard.
No. Why would you rule yourself out of any race?
Why, Nigel? Billy Joe, you can't now.
My contract in Kilcommon extends a small bit too long, so I won't be available.
No, well, I'm going to throw my full weight behind Nigel. Is that the answer to it? So that's...
Oh, well, the Mayo Football Podcast chosen one, Mike, I think, if that's the case.
You'd make a fair tag team, lads.
Oh yeah,
two good North Mayo men. Well, yeah. What could go wrong?
Yeah,
we would have McDonald's.
That's right. Yeah. Can't do too many team meetings in there though.
Yeah. Sure. Look,
not in Mayo, lads. It'd be up on Twitter, I'd say, before you'd ordered your McFlurry before you'd left. I was in Croke Park over the weekend, and I think whether you were in Croke Park or you were down at the local park, there's only one topic that people are interested in talking about. It was actually a relief that the quarterfinals were played and turned out to be, for the most part, really good games of football, because it moved Mayo off the stage for a few hours or a few days. Because I don't know, lads, do you find it the same way? I know one of you is in North Mayo and one of you is in the north of Ireland. God, all that anyone wants to talk about Billy Joe since the bombshell dropped last week seems to be what's going on down in Mayo.
Yeah, that's definitely a factor. I was getting it a lot earlier in the week. Obviously, as the quarterfinals got closer, and particularly being here in Armagh and bumping into Armagh people, the focus turned to the big game. I suppose, sometimes when this news comes out, or news of this sort of type is to come out, you kind of, it would be better if the timing of it was sequenced with other topics of conversation. But I think the early part of week leading up to these big GAA weekends, people are desperate for GAA information, and they don't get it from the teams that are involved because everything is shut down there. And then, of course, Mayo had to be at the centre of any sort of scandal, or I don't know if you'd call it that, but definitely maybe there's things that could have been done differently. And there's such a history of it now over the last number of years that every GAA supporter in counties outside of Mayo think that there's probably worse things going on than there actually is, and they want to talk to you about it. And then you add to the fact that Kevin McStay was a very well known person in GAA circles throughout the country, not just for his previous playing and managerial career, but obviously the work he's done with the Sunday game over the years. So he's a very, very well known person to be an inter-county manager. So that probably added to the fact of why it was such a big topic of conversation throughout the country.
Yeah, look, the plan, lads, is to try and move the conversation along a bit on this pod and talk maybe about some of the other issues that are going to be connected and always will be connected to the Mayo senior football team, namely how managers are appointed, what happens next, and maybe just to start that broader conversation. But we're also conscious we haven't had you guys on since this latest saga started to unfold. So, like, Nigel, we might just get your take, I suppose, on what you've made of the events of the last week or so. What's your own take on where we are right now?
I don't think it's a surprise that we've ended up where we are right now. I think nobody would have been surprised if there was a statement came out that the management had maybe stepped away, or that there was talk of the management stepped away. I think the real bombshell was the manner of the statement. I think that's really what took a lot of people back. And I think, I'm looking at a lot of the stuff within the county, and I think nobody is surprised. I said it myself after the Cavan game, unless something supernatural, for want of a better word, was going to happen, the management were in bother. There was no question about that, and a lot of it had got to do with the style of football. We've gone through all the issues maybe that was there. The panel, how strong the panel was, and everything else. But I think everything that it has stuck with a lot of people, especially outside the county, and it goes back to what Billy Joe was saying there about Kevin McStay. He's well got, and Kevin McStay is a nice fella, and he's a genuine nice fella. And just the wording of it was poor. And I think just somebody jumped the gun quickly on that. I would hate to think it was done deliberately, for want of a better word, or it was calculated. That's the word I'm trying to say. And I just think somebody somewhere, they lost their ways for a few minutes and they jumped with it. There's a lot of stories going around. I've spoken to a few people that would be close to the setup, and I think the word is that, possibly the county board had talked to Kevin and the management team and had expressed maybe, that they didn't feel that he was the right man maybe to bring it forward. And, maybe Kevin asked for a bit of time. But I think maybe to a degree Kevin was caught on the hop just before the meeting started. And I think from what I'm told that they would have liked to have left till the next day to make a statement, but that wasn't the way it was. I know for a fact that a couple of other management were definitely caught on the hop, that some of the family found it out before they did, which is a small bit disappointing. But it goes back to Billy Joe's point there. We don't do things well. We haven't done things for a long time around here well, and it is disappointing that these things end up being on the front pages of newspapers rather than on the sports pages of newspapers. And Mayo GAA have found themselves in that position far, far too often.
It's funny, Billy Joe, because we heard a lot in the Lee Moffitt era about the governance that was put in place, and then Seamus Toohey would have proudly highlighted and the board with them that when they were hiring the Mayo manager last time around, that they were following a process that was there to stop this in the future. And a lot of people felt it was convoluted, but no one could argue that it wasn't needed. Mm-hmm. So the first stress test then that came to this system hit the executive who met the last night, and they failed it, really, I would suggest, because I'd imagine the governance structures have in place something along the lines of how to, let a manager go in that situation as well. And this doesn't fit the profile, I'd imagine.
Doesn't seem to have. Look, I think the worst thing one of the worst things that comes out of these sort of situations, obviously the worst thing is if you're somebody, members of that management team who have worked really, really hard for the last number of years, if they come away from this process feeling insulted or slighted, and maybe they do, and not treated the right way, it doesn't look like that is the case from the outside. Well, that's not the way you want to be carrying out your duties. The other thing is that when you rush and make these statements that maybe aren't thought out as properly as they should be, you create all these opportunities for all these different rumours about what may or may not have happened, who may or may not have got a phone call at the right time, who may or may not have decided and asked for more time, or are willing to step down, or any of that stuff. To me, it just seemed unnecessary, because what's the rush? What really was the rush? And, sometimes you get it. I'm only speculating here. I don't know anything about it. And I definitely didn't go fishing for information over the last week. Is that, are you rushing because you want to control the story? You want to get the story out there before somebody else does. And if you're making your decisions on those sort of grounds, well, then that's kind of, to me, that comes across as petty. What you should be doing as you're a non-profit organization, with the sole function of delivering Gaelic games in the county and doing it with integrity, well, then what's the harm in taking extra time if you need it?
One of the things, lads, that interests me now in terms of this moving on is what's just happened in the last few days, in the last week or so. Is that going to make it harder to get the best person for the job? Billy Joe, do you think this will discourage, not maybe just this particular isolated incident, but just the catalogue of issues that have arisen in recent months and in recent years, and now this one particularly as it relates to the Mayo senior team?
It may, but it will not. It is not. I don't think it's as important an issue for a prospective manager as some people may. Look, if you really want, if you're ambitious about being a senior intercounty manager and you want the Mayo job, you will be far more concerned about the quality of players that you have at your disposal. You'll be far more concerned about the relationship you maybe have with whoever it is, the liaison on the county board, and the resources that will be made available to you to prepare the team. Them sort of issues will be far more important to you than the possibility of having somebody, or maybe not dealing with you in the right way in the media down the road. So to me, like, maybe when you're talking about moving the conversation on, the key thing really then is, any new manager to an extent is, well, do they believe in the bunch of players that we have here, and do you believe that group can be successful while at the same time working with a county board? Do you believe that they are really committed to trying to provide you with the most resources, or the type of resources that you need?
Lads, what is the rush though? Nigel, is there, because there are people who are out there saying, oh God, they had to get it done, and maybe the club championship is starting, you need to have a manager in place. Can you kind of contextualize how important that might be from your perspective?
Yeah, I don't have an issue with them wanting to get it done, especially if the powers that be had their minds made up that this management wasn't the management to guide Mayo forward. So I can understand why they would have wanted to do it quickly. I don't have an issue, lads, with where we've got to. It's how we got to it, And again, I know an awful lot of the people that are on that committee, and they're all genuine people and all for the betterment of Mayo. I just think it was just a silly incident that happened, or a silly statement that was sent out. The worry I have, a small bit disagree with Billy Joe. The worry I have about getting the management in is, you're in an era when social media is it's a goldfish bowl. Mayo is a goldfish bowl, anyways, and that if you have somebody looking at this, and Billy Joe touched on it there, you're going to have to be dealing with liaison people and all that kind of stuff. And if you're outside the county and you don't know what it looks like, speaking to a lot of people from outside the county, especially in the last week, there is a genuine, people think that we don't do our job, we don't do things well, and that kind of stuff. And if you have a good young manager in particular, which I'd like to possibly hope is out there, that wants to take the reins of a county that's a high-profile county and everything else, just sometimes the way we do stuff, I think it might well put somebody off. That's the worry I'd have about it. The other obvious issue is, sponsors and that kind of stuff. How does it affect people, especially, big businesses that run their business in the ways you do in 2025, and a lot of them obviously will look at this and say, it wasn't handled that well. So that's where I see possibly a danger.
Yeah, I'd agree with Nigel. I think the brand has been damaged a little more, or a lot more, by what's happened, and I think that brand has taken some hammering in the last few years, on and off the pitch, and unfortunately primarily off the pitch. Billy Joe, I'm curious as well to see what you think in terms of the type of person that Mayo GAA will be looking for. Not so much even a particular name or a particular identity, but just the type of manager you think right now, or management team even, to broaden it out a bit further. I mean, you see the weekend, you have all these different personalities, from Jack O'Connor to Robbie Brennan, from Jim McGuinness, to Kieran McGeeney. There's such a different spectrum of personalities now that manage inter-county football teams. I suppose you could argue Jack, Kieran and Jim are cut from similar sort of cloth. Robbie Brennan, a completely different sort of character, and Malachy O'Rourke probably somewhere in the middle. Mm-hmm. What's your take on, if you were drawing up the ideal sort of candidate, the perfect sort of manager? What does he look like?
Well, a lot of those candidates you mentioned have experience. And I think that is a factor when you're going to be asked to manage a county like Mayo with the scrutiny, the media scrutiny, with what's expected. I think sometimes, though, we think about the manager and we kind of say, well, what's the job description really, lads? You know, when you boil it down, do we expect somebody to walk in here at the door tomorrow and say, well, we need to be back in an All-Ireland semi-final next year and we need to win this All-Ireland? Because like that hasn't worked in the last 70 years. We're in a very interesting time in Gaelic football in that we're 1 year into basically a revolutionary set of rules in terms of the way the game is played. And it sure looks like that we are far behind the other teams we would have contended with over the last couple of years based on the skill set of the players that we have at our disposal and the way we're playing the game. So for me, I suppose you're putting me on the spot, Mike, in terms of, well, I don't know who should get the job, but I think that the person they should be looking for should be a person that has some sort of track record of improving players, of player development. And that is the absolute key to it. Look, I suppose I'm very close here to what Kieran McGeaney has done in Armagh over the last number of years. As it would happen, I was working in Kildare when he was in Kildare. And he didn't have success. He didn't have a lot of success for many, many of those years. But you could nearly point over a period where he actively improved players. Now, it didn't always pay off. Sometimes you could criticize maybe the team selection he had in certain games in the past, or maybe tactics, and he's always had different backroom teams, and he's showed great ability to bring in new ideas that way. But it's about having a proven track record. And I think in terms of player development, and when you look at the squad the way it is, the way the game is played, you know, sitting in Croke Park yesterday, you're basically watching and you're there thinking, Christ, if you can't kick 2 pointers here, what's the point in even talking out? And so you have to have a manager that or you know, a well-defined backroom team. I would say close-knit backroom team. Mike, we've talked about this before. I hate this idea of pulling people names out that you don't know who they are and bringing them in and expect everything to be cohesive. You know, if you're talking about somebody that brings 2 people along with them, and they have to fill it out a little bit more after that, but you want that core base. But to me, it's about somebody that can pick out 7 or 8 players, be they on the squad or not on the squad, and work with them, identify where they have to improve and improve them. There's no way you're going to improve 7 or 8 players. But if you made, you know, big improvements to 2 or 3 of those, well, then you might find yourself in a better situation in a couple of years' time. You know, if you take the example of Connaughty, playing for Armagh, like he's getting better and better every game. He was, you know, soccer player in Portadown. And that Armagh setup is improving him. He's one of the best forwards in the country now. And I'm afraid that's what to me, that's what we should be looking for.
Hi, Rob here. You've been listening to a free taster of the latest episode of the Mayo Football Podcast. To hear the rest of the pod, all you have to do is head over to patreon.com/Mayo Podcast and become a subscriber so that you can access all the content all of the time for just €5 a month. You can also join by downloading the Patreon app from the Apple Store or the Google Play Store. We think you'll like what you hear.